Tropical Storm Dolly has recently degenerated into an open wave as it's approaching the Lesser Antilles. You would think that would be the end of the story, right? Well, based on recent model guidance, we might see a scenario where Dolly might end up being resurrected. According to several of the ensembles and operational runs that have just came out, we are seeing a scenario where this could potentially reform, reorganize, and re-strengthen very close to the coast of the United States. In today's video, we're going to be going over everything you need to know and how realistic that scenario is. Here is what we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be talking about what's been going on with Dolly. We're going to go over the latest NHC advisory, and then we're going to go over a bunch of models and conditions to see how realistic of a resurrection this could be, because the NHC definitely mentioned this as a possibility, but I want to go over everything, go over all the data, to kind of get a grasp as to what's going on here and how things might pan out going forward. Also noticing, just on the quick grasp of satellite imagery, we're going to go ahead and zoom in on this right now. Let's go ahead and go take a quick gander. This is what we have with Dolly. You're seeing more convection starting to ramp up, particularly right here around the center of circulation. Over the last few hours, I have noticed it's definitely been an interesting situation to see what's been going on. Question is this going to sustain, or is this more popcorn and convection that we're noticing right here? Taking a look at the true color imagery right here, it is doing this during the daytime, so Dmax isn't going to be happening for another 12 hours or so in this part of the Atlantic. So definitely a scenario I do want to keep an eye on just in case. But without further ado, we're going to go ahead and go to the National Hurricane Center. So this is the latest advisory we have. This is the remnants of Dolly. Current maximum sustained winds are 40 miles per hour, pressure of 1,008 millibars. Its current movement is west at 25 miles per hour, so it's hauling across much of the Atlantic right now. Dolly is now an open wave. Interest in the Leeward Islands should monitor the progress of the remnants at this current point. Tropical storm force winds extend outward 115 miles from the center. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at that. We're going to go ahead and read out the discussion as well, just to give you an idea of what's been going on over the last few hours. During the past few hours, the center of Dolly just passed north of NOAA buoy 41041, which did not observe any westerly winds. Examination of the satellite imagery also did not show any westerly winds. Based on this, Dolly has become an open tropical wave with the initial forecast intensity remaining around 35 knots, with those winds occurring north of the center. The system is moving north at this current point in time. The system is currently in a hostile environment with significant southwesterly shear and dry air. These conditions should continue for at least the next 2 to 3 days, with the remnants slowly weakening during that time. The official forecast shows 24 hours of points where the maximum winds are tropical storm force and there is a well-defined vorticity center. After that, the winds are expected to decrease below 35 knots and the system is expected to become less well-defined. This is the interesting kicker that we need to pay attention to right here. The NHC is forecasting and taking a gander at this. Some global models hint at the possibility that Dolly could regenerate in several days, but this time there is poor agreement on where and when this might occur. Should conditions warrant, further information regarding the potential redevelopment of the remnants of Dolly will be provided in subsequent tropical weather outlooks. This is the last advisory on Dolly from the NHC. It is currently post-tropical at this current point. Still, you're looking at heavy rains from the remnants that could affect the Leeward Islands late Saturday into Sunday, with possible impacts in the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and Hispaniola early next week. So this is what we're going to want to watch out for. But this right here is the thing that I am paying attention to, as some global models, at least earlier this morning when the NHC put this out, were hinting at this. Well, this was right before the 12Z guidance came out and gave us a better look as to what's going on, especially with what we've seen with some of the operational runs. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and start taking a gander at those, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at the ensembles and the operationals to give you an idea of what's going on, and then take a look at the conditions to go, okay, is this possible? Can we take a gander at things? How is this going to pan out? Starting off right here, this is the European AI. We're going to get to the regular European, albeit the European regular isn't fully out at the time of recording this video. It won't be out for probably another couple of hours until this video comes out. But ultimately, this is the situation. We're 5 days out according to the European AI run. Right here, it's going to be moving through parts of the Lesser Antilles, going through Puerto Rico. But then you start noticing a couple of ensembles starting to pick up something just north of Hispaniola. It's not particularly strong at this current point in time, but things do get interesting down the line. And then as time progresses, we're looking at the situation. We're seeing more ensembles starting to pick up on this signal right here, just north of Hispaniola, moving into parts of the Bahamas. Some of them are a little bit stronger, 987. That's definitely a bit of an outlier, but the rest are remaining rather weak to moderate at this current point. Let's go ahead and go to 168 hours out and taking a gander at things. Definitely a situation where, at least according to the European AI, you have the system potentially regenerating, moving through parts of the Bahama Islands right here, potentially bringing some impact for you guys over there, potentially as far south as Cuba, and potentially Florida as well if it shifts far enough to the west. By the time this does happen, though, this is a week out, and we're going to need us to watch the conditions to kind of see how that's going to warrant. Then going ahead and going to 8 days out, you're definitely noticing those power numbers according to the Euro AI starting to ramp up, especially as it's moving through parts of the southwestern Atlantic, especially as it's exiting the Bahama region right here at 977, 978, 995, a lot of 990s in here, right, that we're going to want to keep an eye on. Going ahead and going 9 days out by the time we get to September 6th. Situation definitely becomes interesting. You are noticing some signals, at least some weak signals pulling up in the Gulf over here. We're going to want to see if that holds or not, but by and large, this is the area we're going to want to pay attention to. And taking a quick gander at things, 978, 976, 988, 992, 985. We have quite a few ensembles definitely building up over here that we're going to want to keep an eye on. It's definitely not the most I have seen right here, but it has been a bit of an uptrend compared to what we've seen with the 0Z data, so it's something we're going to need to keep an eye on, especially as we're seeing more convection starting to pop up in parts of Dolly right there. Might be a situation where it starts to fight the dry air a little bit better than expected. We'll take a quick gander at those conditions in a few minutes. Here is what we have for the GFS right here. This is the 12Z GFS that we have pulled up at this current point in time. This is 24 hours out, moving towards parts of the Lesser Antilles. Then as we go ahead and go to 2 days out right here, it starts moving through parts of the Lesser Antilles and parts of the Leeward Islands and heading towards Puerto Rico. Likely remains an open wave, but still you're going to be paying attention to this due to the impact potential with this. You're going to want to take this kind of seriously, especially for some pretty gusty winds and some potential flash flooding that might be a risk with this. Then going to 72 hours out, you're not really seeing too much going on right here, but we're going to fast forward a couple extra days. Yeah, not too much is going on according to the GFS ensembles. I know the operational run was definitely a lot more excited than the ensemble, so it's definitely something to watch out for. But 6 days out, you're noticing a few signals starting to pop up. This is a very wide spread right here from north of Hispaniola to the Gulf region over here. Still remains relatively weak. Another signal by the GFS picking up in the MDR. Not sure how realistic that is. I'll keep an eye on it. And then as we go ahead and go to about 8 days out, it's a relatively weak signal from what I am noticing, at least with the GFS. You have a couple ensembles moving into the Gulf. Majority of them stay in the Atlantic Basin, but the models that do have it staying out here in the Atlantic Basin, the models that do have it developing, showcase a potential power signal with this. So you're seeing a scenario where you're not seeing a lot of ensembles from the GFS, but you're seeing power from those ensembles that are developing. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. I do want to pay attention to this, especially if it's going to be impacting areas like the Hispaniola region, the Bahamas, those areas as well. So we'll have to keep an eye on it. And then as we go ahead and go to 10 days out, it's a bit more of a power signal for sure. You're seeing a couple more ensembles picking up in parts of the Gulf as well. The GFS is very just all over the place and very widespread from what I've seen. It's just wide and it's kind of a weak signal from what I've seen, especially compared to some of the other runs that I have seen, especially on the operational side of things. But what we have with the ensembles, we're going to shift over a little bit more to the operationals, show you what's going on with that, and then we're going to start talking conditions. Starting off with the GFS for you guys right here, this is the 12Z run that we have pulled up. How does this compare to the ensembles? Well, remains an open wave as it moves through the Antilles, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, and then as time continues to move on, the operational actually wants this to enter the Gulf region over here, start to get its act together around the Central Gulf around a week out or so. By the time we get to September 4th, you start seeing a system potentially organizing and developing as it head towards Texas over here. Please do keep in mind this is 9 days out. Some of the other runs are not showing this. They're showing this mainly staying out in the Atlantic Basin. So that's what we're paying attention to. Potentially a strong tropical storm heading towards parts of Texas, the Texas-Mexico border around the Brownsville region. So it's definitely an interesting situation, but I do believe this is an outlier right here. If anything does develop, it's most likely going to stay in the Atlantic Basin from what I've seen based on the Bermuda High, based on the ensembles that I've been noticing as well. It's just the steering currents don't necessarily favor this scenario too much unless it's in the eastern part of the Gulf region, but it is an intriguing thing to keep an eye on. Here is the Canadian run, and this is definitely the run that has caught me off guard a little bit. Let's go ahead and show you what the CMC is showing. Remaining a relatively open wave, although it does start to close itself off after it crosses the Antilles and moves north of Puerto Rico. And then as time continues to go on, starting about 4 days out is when you start seeing more organization and a low pressure system starting to tag up in this part of the basin by the time we get to September 2nd. So as time goes on, you're seeing a situation. The Canadian run is definitely interesting as it's developing north of Cuba, heading towards Florida, potentially impacting parts of southeastern Florida. This is a bit of an outlier, I will say. The models are more so all over the place in terms of the impacts, but we are going to pay attention to this because we're seeing ensemble and operational support going on and potentially supporting more development going on in this part of the Atlantic Basin. Even the NHC has noted that this is a possibility. But then as the Canadian starts to move out of Florida, you're looking at a scenario where we might see a hurricane right off the United States coast by the time we get to September 6th. Please do keep in mind, this is just one model run. This is 9 days out. Take it with a massive grain of salt. But ultimately, you have that starting to move through over here, 980 millibar system as it starts to move out to sea and starts to get yanked more towards the northeast. Last run we have to show you is the Icon right here. The Icon has definitely been an intriguing run to say the very least. Similar to the Canadian, not showing much development until it moves past Hispaniola, and then from the time it does start to get its act together, it's over here in this part of the Turks and Caicos in the Bahamas, and then it really starts to ramp up in the intensity, especially as it moves further out to sea, as it starts tapping into the 30 degrees Celsius water temperatures in this part of the basin right here. So you have a scenario where it's going to be an intriguing situation to say the very least. I know I've said that a lot in this video, but it's kind of a scenario where you don't typically see a situation where the storm organizes and then strengthens up to tropical storm strength, then it starts to weaken, becomes an open wave, and then regenerates and then strengthens back up again. I know Hurricane Harvey did this back in 2017. I know Hurricane Lee back in 2017 also did this as well. That's a better example for it mainly staying out to sea. But it's a situation where if that does happen, a lot has to go right for the system to really pull it off. So the main thing is, what's going for it now, and how can it get its act together, and how can it take advantage of some better conditions over here, and what even are the conditions that we're paying attention to? Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go ahead and move out to our Atlantic-wide satellite, and we're going to show you the water vapor imagery. Where the system is moving through right now is an area of dry air. Kudos to it. It's producing a lot of convection. It's producing a good amount of fight that's going on with this right now. It's been producing a lot more convection now than it was several hours ago. So it is starting to put a fight up. It's starting to get its act together, not necessarily, but more so wanting to put up a fight as it's moving through this huge bulk of dry air as it's heading towards the Antilles and Puerto Rico. It's most likely going to be in this part of the Atlantic, in this dry air complex for the next, I'd say, 48 to 60 hours or so before it moves into the Lesser Antilles. There, you start seeing more moisture across parts of the upper levels and some of the lower levels, especially over there. And then as time continues to go on, as it moves past Puerto Rico, the moisture only gets better and better. It's getting reinforced by some convection starting to blow up over in some parts of the Atlantic basin as well. So you're seeing more moisture starting to populate this area. We'll have to see if that continues or not, because if it does, it's definitely going to help moisten the atmosphere and make it easier for this system to redevelop, reorganize, and potentially re-strengthen if it wants to go that route. But it has better conditions ahead of it. It's just going to need to put the fight of its life up for the next 36 to 48 hours before it starts tapping into better conditions as it's approaching the Antilles. And then from that point on, it needs to get away from land and do a few other things. But it does have some stuff going for it in that direction. And we'll go ahead and show you what's going for it. Here is our water temperatures. This is the biggest thing that is going with this tropical system potentially regenerating. This is also part of the reason why the models are a bit more trigger happy with the 12Z suite than they were with the 0Z suite as well. You're seeing increased water temperatures across much of the Atlantic basin. Where it's currently at is in an area of about 27 to 28 degrees Celsius, which is 80 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you who do not use the metric system. And as it moves further and further to the west, it's going to be tapping into better and better water temperatures that could potentially help with its convection and could potentially help get its act together if it gets into some more moist air as it moves closer towards the Antilles. By the time it does do that, look at this. 29 to 30 degrees Celsius water temperatures. That's 84 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you who do not use the metric system. That is very warm water for this system to tap into. And this is why we're seeing those big power numbers both on the ensembles and the operational models that we've seen with the 12Z suite. This has a potentially big power potential because of these water temperatures. This isn't everything, I know. We still have a few other conditions to look at as well, but ultimately this is the biggest thing by far that it has going for it. Let's also take a quick gander at our ocean heat content as well. And here is our OHC. Definitely an intriguing situation where you're at right now, an area of about, I'd say, 50 to 75 OHC, which I believe the convection that it's producing right now is tapping into that ocean heat content. It's tapping more into that fuel tank. It's off to a decent start. The main question is, can it sustain that convection, and can it sustain that convection for an extended period of time? I know DMAX is going to be going on tonight. It'll have a much easier time producing convection. The fact that it's producing convection towards the middle to ender part of the day right now is telling me it's off to a good start, and it's putting up a lot of fight right now, but it has to sustain that, and it has to sustain that through the night and through the day tomorrow. That's the big thing that we need to pay attention to. It has the water temperatures, and it has the ocean heat content to do that as well. But as you move further to the west, this is what it has ahead of it. Up to 100 to 125 OHC. Situation you're going to want to pay attention to right here. This is where the system's going to be running into if it moves this direction and continues to shift this far to the west. It's going to have a lot more fuel in the tank for it to get its act together, produce a lot of convection, and potentially strengthen if the other conditions warrant. But what are these other conditions that we're paying attention to? Let's go ahead and pull them up. We're going to go ahead and get started with our wind shear, just to kind of get that out of the way. Wind shear, where the system currently is at right now. This is the situation. Wind shear is not particularly the most fantastic in terms of tropical development. There is still shear that this system is battling to the north. You're going to want to keep an eye on it. Also watch this belt of shear right here as it moves from the main development region into the Atlantic basin. That's another area I do want to keep an eye on. Let's go ahead and go 24 hours out. You do see an increase of shear across the board, pretty much from this part of the Atlantic to across the entire main development region where the system is going to be at. There is a bit of a decrease of shear. I am noticing this in the next 48 hours as the system starts to move closer towards the Antilles. And you're also noticing this pocket in the southwestern basin is starting to show very low wind shear. That's why some of the models are reflecting on this, and that's part of the reason why some of the models are going, okay, this actually has a good shot of reorganizing and redeveloping. We're going to want to pay attention to this. And then going 72 hours out, look at this. It remains reinforced across the entire part of the Atlantic Basin where the system is going. It's going to be moving north of Puerto Rico by this current point. By the time it gets out of that wind shear pocket, this is 96 hours out. By the time it gets north of Hispaniola, it has a lot better wind shear ahead of it. That's why the Canadian, that's why the Icon, that's why the GFS is more aggressive compared to what we've seen previously. Will that sustain and will that hold? Let's go ahead and go to 5 days out. For the most part, it does. You do start seeing some wind shear starting to populate a bit further to the south. Going to want to pay attention to that down the line. But then as you get to 144 hours out, you do see a little bit more of an increase of shear across parts of the basin that's going on. That remains relatively temporary. As we go ahead and go to 192 hours out, you do start to get more reinforced with some wind shear right here. So it's kind of a more, you have an open window initially, but you're going to want to get out of there at the perfect time type of situation. You have favorable wind shear when the system first moves into that. It's going to have to take advantage of it in the next 3 days once it crosses Puerto Rico for it to really take full advantage. But by the time it starts to get a little bit worse in terms of shear, that's going to be a situation where if the system is fully developed and takes advantage, then yes, it's going to have a much easier time battling that wind shear. But if you have a situation where it's slowly getting its act together and not too much is going on, not too much is really going on. So it's more so what I would say a high risk, high reward type of situation that we're starting to see, at least in terms of the wind shear elements with this. And that continues through the next few days. And that's what we have with the European wind shear. Now, what's the dry air aspect of it? It is battling a lot of dry air right now, but because it's producing more convection now than it was a few hours ago, it's off to a decent job and it's off to a decent start. Look at the Atlantic Basin, though. A lot more moisture is populating in this area. You're going to want to pay attention to this. You're going to want to keep an eye out on this. There is a lot more moisture further to the west that the system could tap into. That's why the GFS, Canadian, Icon, and several of the ensembles are picking up on this, because you're seeing better conditions in that part of the Atlantic, and those persist as we get to 96 hours out. You're seeing a lot more moist air populating this region. You're going to want to take it kind of seriously, because the conditions here, at least in terms of the dry air, actually look better than the wind shear, at least from what I'm seeing with these model runs. This is a situation we're going to want to keep an eye on. Just for my curiosity, does the Canadian and the Icon produce anything like that? No, they do not produce moisture, but I can see if the GFS can give us an idea of what's going on. Here's the GFS. Yeah, the GFS is definitely showing a lot of moisture over here in this part of the Atlantic Basin. That is why the models are so aggressive with this, especially some of the runs that want this to keep out in the Atlantic Basin. So ultimately, it's a scenario where it's more high risk, high reward. You have the conditions that are there, but it's going to have to do it within a limited period of time for it to fully consolidate and for it to fully take advantage. Is it possible? 100%. Is it going to happen? We're going to have to wait and see. The next 24 to 36 hours are the most critical time. The next 36 to 48 hours is equally as critical in terms of how it's going to battle dry air. But the next 3 days are going to determine this whole system right here, especially as it impacts land, especially as it moves through some of the dry air, and as it starts moving into better and better wind shear conditions. How is this system going to respond? We're going to continue to keep an eye on this. We're going to talk more about this on the Triple P show tonight, so be sure you stay tuned for that. But with that being said, we are going to go ahead and close the video out right here. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. Feel free to join the Storms United Discord server. Link to that is in the end screen. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.